The problematic prince. Breathe, breathe. Bjorn lowered his voice a little and whispered slowly. The woman nodded her head and then took a proper breath. She was still shaking, but fortunately she seemed to have escaped the danger of losing consciousness. Breath. The woman mumbled the words he had heard over and over again, steadily taking deep breaths and exhaling repeatedly. The white shoulders that shook with the rhythm were absurdly small and thin. After some breathing had stabilized, the woman hurriedly backed away from him. On her face, which had been blank all along, suddenly, something worthy of being called an emotion came to mind. Shame and vigilance. It was not the attitude the person responsible for making a fuss in the way of others would see. "I am so sorry, Prince." A middle-aged woman who was watching her approached with slow steps and supported the woman. Bjorn's gaze, who glanced at her, quickly turned to the little woman again. She was trying to cover her shoulders, décolleté, and cleavage somehow, but that meaningless effort only drew more attention. She mimicked a young lady once again in the subject that appears in a dress like that. A crooked smile caught the corners of Bjorn's lips as he glanced at the woman. Her face, which had been parched like a corpse, was gradually burning red. Carefully raising her head, when her eyes met him, the woman was startled and even stepped backwards. Now, even her ears were dyed bright red. "I sincerely apologize, Prince." Miss Hardy was very nervous and made a big mistake. The moment she recognized her with her bowed head raised, Bjorn understood the full story of this absurd commotion. It was Victoria Meyer, the very woman who is the best broker in the Lechen marriage market. "Miss Hardy, how are you?" Countess Meyer, who had been walking around the banquet hall, approached Erna. Erna reflexively grabbed her shawl and raised her head. Her eyes, filled with resentment, were quite daring. "You're a girl with more of a personality, it seems." The other girls were busy enjoying their dance, but Erna sat still on this corner bench. Many of the young men who came to apply for the dance were turned away without even managing to make eye contact with Erna properly. "How about dancing at least one song? It's a debutante." "I can't. I don't like this, ma'am." Erna's voice was still trembling softly. She looked around anxiously and then bowed her head again. She was like an idiot without even a speck of sociability, but this troubled expression also became charming where coupled with her pretty face. Countess Meyer gently waved her feather fan. The ugly shawl bothered her, but she decided to leave it alone because if she took it again, she would rip even the curtains of the royal palace to cover herself. She had already shown everything she needed to show, so the dress had fully served its purpose. "Lift your head." Countess Meyer lifted Erna's chin with the tip of the folded fan. It is basic manners to look into the eyes of the other person when having a conversation. "Madam, please." He did quite well in front of Prince Bjorn. "Did you completely forget about that?" Contrary to her gentle smile, her voice was cold. "Prince." Erna, who had been contemplating for a moment, involuntarily closed her body, clenching her lips. It was because a man by that name flashed into her mind. As the world began to spin and suffocate, Erna lost all judgment. It was only after she was able to breathe that she realized what she had done and to whom. Just thinking about it made her feel like the fear would overwhelm her again. "I respect the notion of not dancing, but try to keep a minimum of dignity. It means to keep in mind that this is a way to protect the honor of the Baden family, who have raised Miss Hardy. Do you understand?" The honor of the Baden family. Countess Meyer, who had said those words that scratched her heart deeply, quietly left Erna's side. Left alone, Erna counted numbers with her eyes closed. It was only when he counted to 20 that she was able to regain stable breathing. It's never been like this in Beaufort. For a moment, She felt like a helpless fool. Be patient a little longer. Suppressing the urge to run away from here, Erna slowly opened her eyes. After all, he was there. Grand Duke Schwerin, the Prince of Luchen who watched Erna Hardy's pathetic figure up close. He was talking, leaning against an ornate marble column. Standing opposite him was a man who looked like him. He was the twin brother and Crown Prince Leonard. They were surprisingly identical in height, physique, and appearance. The only difference is that the Crown Prince is wearing glasses. Although Beaufort is a remote country that feels isolated from the rest of the world, even there, the twin princes are quite famous. Erna, who was indifferent to such rumors, even remembered his name. Originally, the first, Prince Bjorn, was the crown prince, but his bad conduct caused anger and resentment throughout the kingdom, and he said that the position was passed to his younger brother, Prince Leonard. Without trying to avoid her gaze, Erna let out a sigh without realizing it. It was because of the feeling of déjà vu when she looked at Prince Bjorn, who began to walk with his neck upright. Although they look the same, the twins' gait is markedly different. Unlike the crown prince, who walked with an upright and modest posture like a soldier, the Grand Duke moved as if enjoying a leisurely stroll. It felt as if only the air surrounding him was flowing slowly. It was a figure I had seen at the train station and on Terra Avenue. Poisonous mushroom. The Grand Duke suddenly turned his head towards Erna, who was muttering blankly. It was a moment when their eyes met with no chance to escape. Her beauty is truly outstanding, I must say, Bjorn thought as she stared at the lady who calmly looked back at him. Just like Gladys Hartford, Erna Hardy possessed an allure that stood out among the others. Even though both women had completely different lineages, both of them were unparalleled beauty that could cause an uproar wherever they went. Perhaps this was the reason he didn't mind getting involved in a scandal with her, even when he normally found such stuff distasteful. However, such a beautiful appearance ended up being wasted due to her insufficient lineage. He had no aversion when declaring such a statement because it was obviously a fact. Of course, he was fully aware how rude such a belief could be. "Are you sure there is nothing between the two of you?" Leonard, who was also carefully watching Erna, asked sternly. "Well, if you're interested in her, I can help you seduce her." Bjorn kept his gaze at the lady and gave a witty reply while slowly turning his head to face Leonard. "What kind of relationship do you want to have with her?" His lips contained an elegant smile that completely contrasted the vulgar implications of the question he asked. "You're crazy." Leonard, who couldn't help but laugh at such an absurd statement, decided to stop doubting his older brother at this point. Bjorn was certainly a madman in many ways, but at least he was a madman true to his desires. "Why don't you go and ask her for a dance? Do you think she would dare to refuse you, the crown prince?" "Why do I have to do that? You like her, don't you?" "What crazy statement are you talking about?" Leonard asked with a frown. "I was just wondering. Maybe you are worried that the girl you like might be having an affair with your brother." "Not at all. I am not interested in such a woman." "You're so rigid, lighten up." Women could freely socialize and expand their social connections during this season. However, some would resort to unsavory means just to quickly achieve results. Although they would succeed to achieve popularity, this kind of fame was usually accompanied by animosity. A family that decided to sell their daughter after heavily deceiving her, and a daughter who willingly cooperates with their plans in exchange of her dignity and pride. In the end, such occurrences were never seen by the others in a favorable light, and no one wouldn't even have the heart to get acquainted with such a woman. The crown prince soon left after getting called by the elders of the royal family. His younger brother, who faithfully did the responsibilities that were once given to him, now perfectly performed the role of the crown prince. However, Leonard stopped after taking a few steps and looked back unexpectedly, perhaps suggesting that they should go together. Bjorn, on the other hand, roughly waved his hand to reject his brother's kind offer and turned around without any regrets. After all, Victoria Meyer was still there, and he didn't want to interact with her any more than he already had. The Grand Duke, who decided to approach the group of nobles who beckoned towards him, unconsciously turned his head to return the gaze that had been persistently following him for quite some time. It was actually that lady, Erna Hardy. The lady, who hesitated to even stand up a few moments ago, was startled to the point of sitting back down again when their gazes met each other. He didn't find it amusing when she grabbed her lace shawl around her tightly, with her cheeks stained with a red blush. Had it not been for the name of Hardy and the existence of Victoria Meyer, he might have been fooled by such an innocent act. He didn't even expect that this lady could make the infamous Grand Duke break out in a cold sweat. Lady Hardy, who glanced at him with her trembling eyes, suddenly bowed her head and began to mumble something incomprehensible. What kind of hellish trick was she planning to do now? Bjorn quickly left the scene before he became a victim of Victoria Meyer's schemes once again. He silently offered his condolences to anyone who would fall on her wretched machinations. Bjorn needs to get married. Philip Niester, who was contemplating seriously, abruptly said, "I think that's the best for him, isn't it?" He turned towards the Queen, who was sitting across from the table, as if asking for her consent. Isabel Niester put down her teacup with a slight frown while clicking her tongue. With the kingdom enjoying peace and prosperity, Philip's greatest concern was his troublesome eldest son, Bjorn. Bjorn will not even listen to you, much more follow your suggestion. We have to somehow make him follow our will then. You don't know your Majesty's son very well then, it seems. A light sigh penetrated the night air filled with the scent of spring season. The terrace in the garden, where the king and his wife enjoyed tea time together, was filled with the scent of flowers in full bloom. I even secretly asked him if there was any girl he likes, but he resolutely denied having any. He even asked me if one divorce is not enough. What a smartass. That is, Gladys' name, which could be heard from all over the kingdom as of lately, was one of the things that bothered his son the most. He expected Bjorn to be on edge because of this. However, he was amazed to see his son's carefree attitude during the party. Philip could even foresee that something absurd would happen when that girl and Bjorn were reunited, and just thinking of such a scenario made his back ache. If that really happened, he would rally his army and wage war against Lars. Don't worry, Philip. A reunion with Gladys will be unlikely to happen. Isabel reassured him as if she could hear her husband's concern with a single glance. You know it too. What kind of heartbreak from being abandoned Bjorn suffered to make that kind of decision? I know. Of course I still remember. The king's eyes deepened as he nodded slowly. I want to step down from my position of being the crown prince and concede my rights to the throne. Additionally, I want to file a divorce. Bjorn declared calmly on the night his child was born. I've already made up my mind. I will not change my decision no matter what, Your Majesty. There was no emotion in his face as he slowly uttered those words. However, the silent rage and despair boiling inside the crown prince's eyes, who was only 22 years old at that time, overwhelmed Philip. In the end, they yielded to their son's will as they knew well that it was the best outcome for him. However, His Majesty couldn't even do anything to lessen the pain his son had suffered even when he was Bjorn's father, because in the end, he was still the king of Luchen. But honey, there's nothing more we can do at the moment no matter how much I think about it. Let's somehow try to get him to marry again for now. Philip's conclusion, after much deliberation, ended up being the starting point of this conversation. It's not like we haven't tried that before. If it's marriage, then that kid will decide what he wants himself. It's a problem because Bjorn doesn't want to get married. I guess in the end, we need to make him interested in marriage again. Speaking of which, does that lady really have nothing to do with Bjorn? He looked at his wife with a mixture of expectation and concern. Leonard asked his brother a few times, and it seems he is not interested in her. Is that so? Do you really like that lady of the Hardy family? It's not like that, but I welcome any lady that can move Bjorn's heart. As long as she's a better lady than that Gladys, of course. There was a faint hint of anger that could not be hidden in his voice as he mentioned Gladys' name. Come to think of it, it is time for us to move to the summer palace soon. Let's pay more attention to him this summer season. It sure will be nice to finally see Bjorn have a happy family before the end of the year. I agree. She thought such sentiments were a dream that wasn't very likely to come true, but Isabel still happily nodded her head when such thoughts came to her mind. There was nothing else that could give such hope to her pitiful husband who was only worried about his eldest son every day other than seeing Bjorn finally live happily with someone who loves him dearly. I hope that he will find happiness soon. Erna. The Grand Duke felt like that was the only name he could hear recently whenever he went after that cursed debutante ball. Much more so when he encountered male nobles who were infamous for their debauchery. It's been a few days since I sent flowers to Lady Hardy and there is still no response. Did the maid possibly misplace the card I sent with it? A guest has visited and is now waiting for you. Mrs. Fitz breathed deeply and continued speaking with apprehension. Well, it is Princess Gladys. She is currently waiting for you in the library. Her added statement stopped Bjorn. I'm sorry, Prince. I know. He cut off Mrs. Fitz's words, which were insignificant for his current situation. There was hardly any emotion in his eyes. A cup of tea, please. Make it strong. To Mrs. Fitz, who followed with a worried face, Bjorn gave a calm command. Unlike his lips that were softly curved in a calm smile, his cold eyes did not contain any hint of emotion. As you wish, Your Highness. Swallowing the words she wanted to say, she took a step back and hurriedly went away to fulfill what she was ordered. Bjorn, on the other hand, soon disappeared after passing through the door of the study. Greetings, Princess. Bjorn greeted his unexpected guest calmly while keeping eye contact, his lips curved slightly in a relaxed smile. Gladys, who was nervously fiddling with her clasped hands while waiting, raised her head with an expression of surprise. It has been a while. Lady Hartford finally remembered her manners and greeted back with difficulty. It was a stupid, worthless greeting that she practiced countless of times while she was inside the carriage on the way here. The Grand Duke, however, didn't bother to continue the conversation and just stared at her. I'm sorry for my sudden visit without any prior notice. It's a big mistake on my part. Still, I think it would be better to meet here in private rather than outside. Her voice trembled so much that she couldn't even finish her apology properly, but Bjorn continued to be silent. Clear drops of tears started to pool in her eyes, and her soft lips were bitten in frustration. The gap between the Bjorn in her memory and the Bjorn in front of her was so glaringly obvious. The man that she remembered in the past still had hints of childishness and immaturity within him, but now, her shoulders couldn't stop from shuddering from his intimidating and mature aura that he currently possessed. Together with his face that now appeared sharper and his lean but toned body that couldn't be hidden by his attire, the current Bjorn Njester was someone that she couldn't even recognize. In the end, Gladys couldn't look at him any longer and bowed her head down in shame. She was wondering why her vision was getting blurry until thick tears finally fell on the back of her trembling hands. Bjorn, however, just continued watching this scene of a pretty lady crying beautifully without any changes on his expression. Not long after, Mrs. Fitz finally arrived with refreshments at hand and saw such a view. If it was anyone else that didn't have any idea about the history of the two ex-lovers, they would have condemned Bjorn for being heartless. Unfortunately, it was her, the former crown prince's nanny, so she completely ignored Gladys, set the tea table up, and left right away. Indifferently looking at the woman who was once his wife, the Grand Duke leisurely grabbed the teacup in front of him. Gladys, on the other hand, continued to weep pitifully even after the sugar cubes thrown into the teacup lost their shape. I guess it's good to know that nothing has changed. He let out a silent exhale that resembled a sigh. The scene in front of him brought out a memory from long ago when she received the news of their divorce. Gladys Hartford's only reaction of weeping in the same way as she was crying now. It's still the same boring reaction. I remember we have cleanly broken off any relationship between us, Princess. His eyes, which reflected the sparkling river and the forest beyond the window, narrowed little by little. I gave what I was supposed to give, and I already got what I was supposed to receive. Isn't that right, Gladys? Bjorn, Just tell me what you want already. He cut her off with a voice void of any emotion. I guess it has been a long time that you have already forgotten my almost non-existent patience?
Imsora.
I still remember. Gladys, who barely stopped sobbing, replied with difficulty. Because of me. For what happened. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
Bjorn leaned back deep in his chair and just stared at her. The lady in front of him was still as beautiful as before. Nonetheless, the fact that such a mesmerizing appearance failed to provoke any emotion in him was in the end no different from before. And so, he asked with a smile back on his lips. There is no way you would have visited Lechen just to say such a thing. Did the King of Lars give you an order in the end? Now that all the problems are gone, he hopes you will once again get along well with your ex-husband. It's not just for that reason. Gladys pulled out a handkerchief and wiped away her tears, then raised her head once again. I really wanted to apologize, so I gathered all of my courage to do so, because I feel sorry for you all this time. For what I did. You must have misunderstood something, Princess. Bjorn slowly lowered his eyes, feeling a suffocating and foreign emotion for the first time. The deal we had was pretty fair. In terms of profit and loss, we might have even benefited on the contrary. But I am moved to tears because my ex-wife is so worried about me. She, however, didn't really harbor any negative feelings about their divorce. Their relationship didn't have any pure feelings such as love right from the start, and 4 long years had already passed. Any sort of attachment had already disappeared between them. In the end, this dirty feeling that was plaguing his chest, if he had to define it, would just be annoyance. Bjorn, whose gaze was at the table's smooth surface, gently pushed the teacup with the tip of his long finger towards the edge. The sound of breaking glass soon shook the stifling stillness of the study. He slowly rang a bell without any remorse, even with the now speechless Gladys in front of him, and not long after, a middle-aged maid came into the study. Princess Hartford began to sob once again as the Grand Duke's gaze passed through the sparkling shards of the broken teacup and stopped at the face of the bewildered maid. Clean it up, he ordered with a light smile on his face, then proceeded to leave the study. After being mentally beaten up by the unexpected encounter he had with his ex-wife, a feeling of intense fatigue came rushing in. In the end, I should still apologize, right? Erna raised another question full of caution. She felt sorry for the mistakes she had made to His Highness during the ball and wanted to personally apologize. In the end, she couldn't find a suitable opportunity as he was always surrounded by a lot of people and Erna never had the courage to approach him. What do you mean by apologizing? You don't have to do that, miss. Lisa answered more adamantly after she returned from her trip to the kitchen. Perhaps the result would still be the same even if he was alone. Just making eye contact with His Highness reminded her of that day, which made her heart sink even more. How could she face His Highness personally with such a shameful memory haunting her? No matter how hard she tried, she would always end up running away in a hurry when she finally came to her senses. During those times, that embarrassing debutante dress also came to her mind without fail. Together with His Highness' calm gaze who casually glanced at her exposed body, she couldn't help but to feel like she would die of embarrassment. What a vulgar place the metropolis really was. I think I still have to apologize, Lisa. I must have caused so much trouble for him. After thinking for a while, she still came up with the same decision in the end. She didn't really have the courage to face him, but it's rude to make a mistake and continue acting as if she was not aware of it. Ugh, wait a minute, miss. Lisa stood up and hurriedly left the bedroom. After a while, she returned carrying a large box in her arms. It's a present for you, but you have to return them after reading. If you want them, I'll give some to you, but they're shared items that the maids tirelessly saved up for unfortunately. Lisa seriously explained to the bewildered Erna. Is this for me? Why? You must study. I've collected and studied various news and gossip when I'm not busy. I now know all sorts of stories. The maid held out the magazine at the top of the box in front of her. It was a weekly magazine with an in-depth article about the poisonous mushroom prince, Prince Bjorn. Erna, in the end, had no choice but to accept it. After flipping through a few pages, a page filled with holes appeared in front of her. This hole, it's because of those bad maids who cut out pictures of His Highness. Everyone is swearing at him, but once a picture of the poisonous mushroom prince was posted, this is what would happen. Lisa criticized the immoral maids. After a few condemning words, she suddenly became pensive and hurriedly stood up. Okay, while you are studying, I'll go run an errand for you, miss. Before Erna could say anything, the maid urgently left the bedroom. Erna, who was left alone, looked down at the weekly magazine on her lap with a bewildered expression. Just a quick glance at it could tell her that it was a magazine filled with fairly provocative gossip. Struggling between the thought that it was not right to pry on other people's lives this way and the curiosity she couldn't shake off, Erna eventually ended up turning the page to the next article. The photos were gone and there were gaps on the pages here and there, but she didn't find it difficult to discern the full context of the whole article. She carefully read the magazines while the tea on the table cooled down. Various scandals and incidents involving Schuber socialites, brilliant advertisements, horoscopes, and even dating counseling. The magazine contained all kinds of miscellaneous news. It was quite a shocking new world for her, a completely different view from the magazines she used to buy back in her hometown. She was able to get a rough idea of the troublemakers in Schuber's social circle. The most prominent one was, of course, the poisonous mushroom prince, Bjorn. Not all of the stories in these magazines were true, but some of the articles were far beyond Erna's comprehension, especially those stories concerning His Highness, Prince Bjorn. Information about him disturbed her the most, since he was apparently a father who abandoned his own child. After his divorce from Princess Gladys, the prince said that he had never met his son. Even when the child died of an illness without seeing his father for several years, the prince still ignored him even at his funeral. It was considered shallow to judge someone you only met a few times, much more someone who you had not interacted with frequently. However, the pendulum inside her heart had already tilted towards one direction after learning such distressing information. The prince seemed to be a bad person, a very bad person. It seems that Count Lehman is the most prominent husband candidate for the Hardy family as of this moment. Erna Hardy's name now became a regular topic of their group while playing cards. Bjorn glanced at Peter, who was sitting next to him, while checking the cards in his hand. Count Lehman? That old man is still alive. Giggles and laughter flowed from everywhere as an absurd question was asked with seriousness. Count Lehman, an old man who would soon turn 70 years old, wanted to marry a young lady who was less than 20 years old. Bjorn raised his eyebrows slightly and leaned backwards with his long legs crossed together. The current round was going well for him, and as long as there were no unexpected turn of events, the winner of this round was clear as if it had already been decided. I heard that Viscount Hardy meets up with Count Lehman from time to time. A few days ago, he said that he enjoyed an opera performance together. Of course, Erna Hardy joined them as well. Hey, as long as you pay a really high price, nothing else matters, I guess. I guess their marriage would be of that kind, huh? If that old man suddenly died early, I could just sell my daughter once again to another rich man. The atmosphere of their game gradually reached its climax, while words of ridicule and pity for Lady Hardy were diligently exchanged between the participants. The Grand Duke decided to take a step back while waiting for the right moment to strike once and for all. It was a game that was good enough for him to see until the very end after raising the stakes again and again. Ah, Bjorn. I heard that Princess Gladys took trouble to visit Schuber Castle to meet her ex-husband. Will this year's summer end up as the hottest in the history of Lechen? Come to think of it, Miss Hardy strangely resembles Princess Gladys, don't you think? They look different, but their atmosphere is somewhat similar in the end. They are both beauties that possess a delicate aura, like an innocent baby deer. A crooked smile hung on the corners of Bjorn's lips as he glanced over Jerks, nodding their heads in agreement. Said baby deers could still bite you hard if they so wished to. He guessed these bunch of idiots need to experience this firsthand before they come to their senses. Then, shall we do something interesting? While Bjorn was choosing his next hand, Leonard suddenly exclaimed with an odd tone. Let the poor and miserable Lady Hardy enjoy the courtship of a young man before she falls into the deep pit of despair of a loveless marriage with an old man. Wouldn't that be a good memory to give to her? Didn't you see her running away quickly after someone offered a simple greeting to her? I already tried to court her by repeatedly sending flowers and cards for days, but no response has been sent in reply for my earnest feelings. Let's make a bet then. Leonard's eyes gleamed as he scanned the poker chips piled up on the card table. Bjorn, who had been making calculations to finally end this game, raised his head with a wrinkled eyebrow. Whoever can move Ms. Hardy's heart wins. In other words, it is a bet on who will earn her favor first. How about it? Leonard's eyes were currently too clear to dismiss his ridiculous suggestion as being drunk and intoxicated. In the end, it didn't take too long for the silence that enveloped the card table after such remarks to change to an enthusiastic cheer. Wouldn't it be fun? How about betting all the chips we have here? Great. I will join. Peter pushed the stack of poker chips in front of him with excitement. Bjorn let out a low sigh and lazily leaned back on his chair. As more fools showed their interest in participating in the useless bet one by one, the game that they were just playing became neglected. Leonard, you bastard. You think I'm going to lose this new bet? Just watch how I'll overturn your game board thoroughly. Leonard didn't flinch despite Bjorn's annoyed glance. In the meantime, poker chips from all over the place filled the center of the messed-up table. The participants realized that the stakes were much larger than they had initially expected, and now they all seriously desired to win. However, there was only one person who had not yet placed a bet. Bjorn, are you going to join too? Come on. Peter sneaked up to Bjorn's side while trying to persuade him. Everyone in the room knew that Bjorn would never participate in this type of bet. Therefore, it was necessary for them to offer a bigger stake, since the chance to rob the prince, who was well known for his luck in gambling, doesn't come very often. "Join us, yeah?" Peter asked again nervously, pushing the poker chips piled up in front of Bjorn. Although the prince was annoyed by the incessant begging, he didn't turn down their provocation in the end. The attitude of leaving in the middle of a game annoys him, but there was nothing that he could do if they threw in such generous bait. Excited, Peter gathered all the remaining chips to the center of the table. The stakes for receiving Erna Hardy's favor were now enough to afford a single townhouse in the city center. Let's start the game at today's art exhibition. Everyone is going to attend, so it's fair, isn't it? Leonard, who was the instigator of this pathetic bet, solemnly declared. After drinking the rest of his drink, Bjorn checked his pocket watch. It was going to be morning soon, and the opening ceremony of the Royal Academy of Arts exhibition, which he had to attend even if he hated it, was approaching sooner than he expected. The morning sun started to shine its light, marking the start of the day. However, Erna, who had been making lilies of the valley made of paper, was already wide awake even before the sky started to lighten up. The fake flowers, complete with their stems and leaves, were so realistic that they could be easily mistaken for freshly picked flowers. She proudly looked at the flowers that bloomed with the help of her own hands like magic. The more delicate a flower and their petals were, the more valuable it became. Because of this reason, fake flowers of the lily of the valley became one of the most expensive ones. It was her favorite flower, and it was also the one she could make well. It would be great if I could find a place to sell this. She looked at the carefully crafted flowers with regretful eyes. Was there any way for me to sell artificial flowers directly to the stores? Erna stared at the completed flowers while seriously contemplating. I can do whatever I want here, so all I need to do is find a store that can sell these. If that's too difficult, how about I send the finished flowers back to Beaufort? But if the postage costs are too much, I guess I can personally deliver them to Beaufort and visit everyone at least once every season. A light knocking sound rang out when Erna reached such a conclusion. It was her maid, Lisa, who came inside with a large box in hand. Inside was a new dress and hat for her to wear. "This dress is pretty decent, isn't it, my lady?" Lisa smiled as she showed off the blue dress she pulled out of the box, as if she was trying to appease a child, and Erna smiled and nodded her head in agreement. Even when it was now in the middle of summer, it was still a dress that was quite shameful by her standard. While it doesn't expose any skin under her collarbone, compared to the last dress she wore on that night, it was a much more decent dress. "Why did you bring a new set of clothes? Didn't you know? You have to attend the art exhibition's opening ceremony today." Erna and Lisa stared at each other, eyes widened in surprise for different reasons. "The art exhibition? Me?" "Yes. It's a famous exhibition that is held every summer at the Royal Academy of Arts." Lisa was delighted as if it was her own business, and flipped the dress again in front of Erna. The Royal Academy of Arts. A smile slowly began to spread across Erna's lips, who had been excitedly repeating those words. It was thanks to the nostalgic name of her only friend, Pavel, that was connected with that place. Maybe I can meet Pavel. With that hope, Erna started her day with more energy than usual. After breakfast, she dressed up and was led by the Viscount into the carriage. Even the landscape of an unfamiliar city did not feel as threatening as usual. "Miss Hardy, you're really a helpless girl." Victoria Meyer's deep sigh broke the silence of the still garden. Erna, on the other hand, was sitting on a bench as if she would collapse at any moment with how hard she was gasping for breath. It was a bit pitiful and pathetic to see her chasing after her breath after only walking for a bit. "Isn't it time for you to get used to it?" How long do you plan on showing such a pathetic side of yours?
I'm sorry.
I'll do my best, Countess. Miss Hardy could have used her looks with just a small smile, and a little bit of flattery and different types of men would be on her beck and call. Seeing Erna, who couldn't even properly do such an easy and simple task, made Countess Meyer's chest suffer from searing pain of regret. She had seen many young girls who were unfamiliar and had difficulties with socializing, but Erna Hardy was the first one who hated it so much that she would even have trouble breathing when talking to strangers. Countess Meyer thought that maybe she could endure it quite well today, but the symptoms started once again when the son of Count Bergen spoke to her. If she hadn't been quick to support this little lady and take her out to the garden, Erna would have become a spectacle for everyone to see today. I didn't do that on purpose. Countess, I know. Victoria cut off Erna's sentence while stroking her flabby forehead. It wouldn't have mattered for you to act like this if you were only a simple young lady. However, because of your circumstances, it is a tragedy for me and Ms. Hardy if you continue acting like this. Yes. Lady Hardy raised her head and looked at the Countess with her wet eyes. The reputation of being a beauty comparable to Princess Gladys was deliberately created by the Hardy family, but it was also an objective fact that couldn't be refuted in the end. Listen to me well, Ms. Hardy. This matter doesn't only concern you, it's also a matter regarding my honor on the line. A deep sigh escaped Victoria's lips as she looked at the innocent-looking lady in front of her. Ever since her plans went wrong at the beginning, she regretted that she might have made a mistake in taking this job, but in the end, it was already too late for her to quit. She wouldn't sit still and let the Hardy family's daughter pour muddy water over her splendid achievements. Once the time for the pre-ceremonies to begin arrived, Victoria Meyer hurriedly stood up from her seat. I'll go inside first. You can follow me inside once you manage to calm down. Do you understand? Lady Hardy, who looked up at Victoria as if urging her to leave quickly, nodded her head vigorously. Taking another deep breath for the nth time today, Countess Meyer hurriedly left the garden. Erna squeezed her cold hands tightly, rubbing them together and warming them up with her breath from time to time. The choking pain in her chest had now subsided, but she did not dare to return to the place where countless eyes were staring at her. It's going to be okay. She struggled to sit upright while repeatedly reassuring herself with a familiar lie. She took out a handkerchief and wiped her face gently and carefully organized her messy clothes. It was then that she caught a glimpse of a familiar person at the end of the trail where she unintentionally turned her head.
Pavel?
She muttered with a blank face, while the tall man, on the other hand, disappeared into the depths of the garden. Red hair, a large physique, and a familiar back. It was clearly the figure of Pavel Lore that she clearly remembered.
Pavel.
She hurriedly called out the familiar name and stood up from her seat. The sound of hasty footsteps running along the paved pathway began to shake the languid atmosphere of the garden in the middle of summer. A woman's voice calling out an unfamiliar name woke up Bjorn from his nap. The voice, which had become clearer as the time passed, suddenly disappeared as soon as he opened his eyes. All that was left was the soft rustling of the leaves from the lush tree above his head and the sound of running water from a nearby small fountain. After letting out a soft sigh, he indifferently closed his eyes before all of the sudden, the unknown woman's voice could be heard once again.
Pavel.
With a voice resembling a clear chirp of a small bird, the woman called out someone's name.
Pavel.
Small dotted patterns, which were made by the sunlight streaming through the leaves, fluttered over Bjorn's face as he whispered the unknown name with his eyes closed. In the meantime, the unknown woman's voice had become much closer. Listening to her voice, he could tell that she was a very delicate and cheerful lady. He begrudgingly opened his eyes again, as if resigning to his fate. It was a petite lady in a blue dress, Erna Hardy. The cursed name abruptly came to his mind. At the same time, the said lady, who had been looking around, fell down from the bench all of the sudden. As if she had not yet noticed him lying on the opposite bench, Erna looked down at her toes with a sullen face. The shoes that crept out under the hem of her dress were as small as those of a doll. Bjorn, still lying on the bench, watched her closely. For a long time, she gasped for breath as she ran somewhere in such a hurry. His gaze, which passed through the ribbon that decorated the front of her dress and towards her long brown hair that swayed along her steps, stopped on her soft lips that were slightly opened. At that moment, she suddenly raised her head. Erna, who was looking at Bjorn with eyes widened in surprise, suddenly stood up straight with a belated scream. The Duke watched the fascinating scene with interest, as Lady Hardy acted as if she had met a criminal when she was the one who broke into someone else's hiding place.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
She apologized apprehensively with a voice that was barely squeezed out. The feather decorations on her hat, which fluttered due to her gesture of keeping her head down, made him smile unknowingly.
I'm sorry.
I am so sorry, Your Highness. Erna, who repeatedly apologized while bowing, hurriedly turned around and started to run away from him once again. Bjorn silently stared at her fleeing back with a smile and finally decided to sit up. He found Lady Hardy, who always ran away at the mere sight of him, quite amusing. However, he also found it annoying at the same time. Why the hell does she run away every time she sees me? Did I do anything to her? Strictly speaking, I should be the one running away with how I suffered all this time because of her. Did she come to this remote garden corner to enjoy a secret rendezvous with her lover? Pavel, said Bjorn, recalling the name that Lady Hardy was calling out a while ago. They probably promised each other to meet in this garden. He suddenly remembered those idiots who believed that Lady Hardy was an innocent baby deer a few days ago and felt a smidgen of pity for that lucky man who she planned to meet. It was then that he noticed something on the ground where Lady Hardy had been standing a while ago. Squinting his eyes, he slowly approached the unknown item and picked it up. It was a white lace handkerchief with an embroidery of her name. Gladys Hartford arrived near the end of the opening ceremony, just when the congratulatory speech of the director of the Royal Academy of Arts, dedicated to the emerging artists who won the prize in this art exhibition, had ended. Princess Gladys' beauty is still so breathtaking, not to mention that elegant figure. I heard that she also visited the Grand Duke's castle. Wouldn't you hate such a husband who made you do all of that? Still, they were once a couple and also had a child between them. How easy could it be to cut off their relationship completely? Without such a tragic incident, Princess Gladys would certainly have become a queen that is as great as Her Majesty. The more I think about it, the more I couldn't understand the Grand Duke. Why the hell did he commit such a horrendous thing with a wife like that? Even his rights to the throne were even stripped off in the end. The low whispers were quickly exchanged among the guests, their voices harmonizing with the music that the band had begun to play. Erna stood quietly beside a potted palm tree in the corner of the room as her gaze stared at the place where the guests' eyes were focused. The princess, who she was familiar with from the pictures in the newspapers and magazines that Lisa gave her, was much more dignified and beautiful than she had imagined. How could His Highness have committed an affair with a wife like that? Erna frowned involuntarily when she remembered the man lying on the stone bench in the garden. Fortunately, the unpleasant memories did not last long as the name of her close friend came into her mind once again.
Pavel.
It was obviously Pavel. She chased after him frantically, but in the end, she only managed to see the back of her dear friend whom she missed. There was no way that she made a mistake, since he's been her friend for over 10 years. She could easily recognize him even when she could only see his back. Erna raised her eyes cautiously and looked around once again. Her heart began to race with hope that maybe she could finally meet Pavel here. However, it didn't take long for that excitement and hope to turn into fear. In her mind, she couldn't help but feel that the eyes of the guests were peeking at her. She suddenly felt her chest tightened up with apprehension, making it difficult for her to properly breathe. Erna clasped her trembling hands and stood closer to the palm tree that was taller than her in an attempt to hide her small figure behind the tree's leaves. There are no humans here, only animals and plants. She seriously thought of the absurd advice Countess Meyer had given her. The slender young ladies became weasels running in the woods. The old gentleman with a sloppy face was an angry goose, and that woman in a dark green dress with a bright red ribbon was a yew tree that bore fruit. The absurd imagination soon unexpectedly brought her a sense of stability. Even though her body was still shaking and sweating, she was able to avoid the pain of not being able to breathe due to panic. Finally able to breathe even for a bit, she finally noticed the commotion within the crowd of guests. Prince Bjorn was now standing at the entrance of the hall, and Princess Gladys, who was greeting the crown prince, also became aware of the Grand Duke's presence shortly thereafter. Prince Bjorn stopped for a moment and stared at Princess Gladys with narrowed eyes, and entered the hall shortly after. Erna became part of the onlookers as she gazed at his dignified figure with bated breath. A wolf, staring at the prince who leisurely crossed the hall with unhurried steps. Such a thought came into her mind unexpectedly. He is certainly a man who reminded me of that graceful beast, I guess. A beautiful and majestic white wolf, just like the one in the crest of the Dniester royal family. Bjorn looked at Gladys as he took a slow step forward. It wasn't difficult for him to figure out what the current situation and his ex-wife's intentions were. It seems that he was too carefree. He thought she already understood what he wanted after their last conversation. I guess she's still very obvious and typical. Even with apparent nervousness on her face, Gladys still showed hope when she caught a glimpse of him. Such a situation made him laugh. To say that her return to Luchen was not the will of King Lars seemed sincere, if he was idiotic enough. Originally, she was someone who was so pure that lying was something that she couldn't do. However, that pure and innocent princess taught the Grand Duke certain truths that were more despicable and irresponsible than lies. Examining his father, mother, and Leonid's stiff expressions, Bjorn arrived in the middle of the hall. The sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the dazzling light of the chandelier enveloped his upright and dignified figure. Her relationship with Princess Hartford was quite a fair deal for both of them, and they ended it up in a clean and concise manner. This view of his still hadn't changed. However, it was a different story if Gladys wanted to start a new game. He had no intention of letting himself suffer, especially if the cause was Gladys Hartford herself. Suddenly, a certain lady caught his attention. The Grand Duke shifted his gaze to Erna, who was hiding next to a potted palm tree. His lips, that were tightly closed in a straight line, curled up softly as he remembered the handkerchief that was inside his pocket. Such an obvious and boring old trick. That lady's intention was so obviously clear to him. Seeing that she was so good at committing embarrassing schemes, it seemed that this Lady Hardy was also as obvious and typical as a certain princess that he knows well. Then, there is no other game piece that is as advantageous as her. Finally reaching a clear conclusion internally, Bjorn took a step without hesitation. He slowly approached the place where Gladys stood, when suddenly, he turned around to another direction, which caused the agitated crowd to break into a commotion. Erna, realizing that something bad was gonna happen soon, took a step back, but the prince quickly narrowed the gap that she had meaninglessly created. There was no reason for him to hesitate if Lady Hardy was his current winning hand, both in the bet that he made with his peers and in the game he was playing with Gladys. Give what you could give and you would receive what you deserve. That was how gambling works. Not to mention, he was also someone whom others could make an easy and clean transaction to. It was agreed that the bet starting point was today's exhibition, and the day of the final battle was the day of the rowing competition. Bjorn closed the gap between Erna with the last few steps as he carefully recalled the contents of the bet that they made. The rowing competition was held every summer on the longest day of the year, and during this day, various festivals were held all over Lechen to celebrate the hot season. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was the highlight of the summer for socialites. It was the largest and most colorful event celebrated for that season. The highlight of the Schwerin Summer Festival was the fireworks display on the Abbot River during the night of the end of summer. There was always a scarcity of boats in the city during the event, thanks to the multiple young lovers who believed in the childish myth that seeing the fireworks on a boat together ensures a long-lasting relationship between the couple. On that special day, the person who boarded the boat with Erna would become the winner of the bet. He thought he was a bit of an asshole, and this view was still not much different as of now, he admits. But in the end, Bjorn had to win any bet that he participated in. It was not a bad deal for her too, as her prestige would rise a little more because of the rumor that she was someone who was courted by him, Prince Bjorn. Wasn't that what Lady Hardy's accomplice, Countess Meyer, was aiming for in the first place? If more bidders jump in with a burning desire to win her hand in marriage, she might get a groom that was far better than that dying old count. Here you are, young lady. Bjorn looked down at the petite lady with friendly eyes, his voice filled with power, as if he wanted the other guests to hear him. Standing under his shadow, Erna couldn't help but to blink her big round eyes in confusion. You left this in the garden. With his head bowed down while maintaining eye contact with Lady Hardy, he deliberately held out the handkerchief he took out slowly. Erna's face turned bright red when she finally saw her name embroidered in the handkerchief. Thank you. After a while, she reached out a trembling hand and received the handkerchief. He found it unbelievable that she unknowingly performed the classic scheme of deliberately leaving something behind. Bjorn, on the other hand, watched her reaction with keen interest. An audacious lady who tried to use her body to increase her worth, and at the same time she was someone who took walks on Terra Boulevard while wearing a rustic dress. Currently, he was having a hard time trying to figure out which one of these facets was the real Erna Hardy. To some extent, it seemed that those idiots who were fooled by this scheming lady could understand his current plight, since at least on the surface, she indeed appeared as an innocent and pure lady that was like no other in this world. Will you give me the honor of appreciating these paintings together, young lady? When he noticed that the guest's attention had now solely focused on the two of them, he held out his hand in a respectful manner. Erna, who was just looking for a chance to escape a while ago, was startled to the point that her face paled from shock. Her lips looked exceptionally red and stood out more against her pale white skin. Me? Erna mouthed her question because she couldn't find her voice to reply, while he continued to stare at her with a calm smile. Come on, let's go. He took the lady's motionless hand and put it on his arm. Since you want to take advantage of me so much, you can use me now as much as you want. You wouldn't be able to find such a neat and fair transaction. Bjorn escorted Erna affectionately and proceeded to tour the gallery. Among the noisy spectators, Gladys was shocked to the point that she turned white like a ghost. She thought she must have looked just as nice as Bjorn and his partner when she still spent her days as the beloved crown princess of the Kingdom of Lechen. He found out later that the story about his affair had spread throughout the city before nighttime even arrived. It was said that Prince Bjorn was frolicking with another lady in front of Princess Gladys, who had come to Luchen to forgive her ex-husband and reunite with him. Additionally, the other lady was actually Erna Hardy, the very woman who was soon to be married off for the sake of money. Of course, no matter what speculations and accusations were thrown at him, he didn't care and completely ignored these rumors. No rumor was disturbing enough to faze him other than the talk of an apparent reunion with Gladys. Bjorn put strength into the hand that was holding Erna's arm that was resisting weakly. Suddenly, she raised her head and stared at him with her round blue eyes that were surrounded by long, dense eyelashes. Her eyes reminded him of a doll. After staring at him with her beautiful eyes, she, however, bowed her head again after a while, as if she had come to the conclusion that there was no further harm that would be done to her. With her silent agreement, he led the stiff lady through the crowd with a slow pace to provide enough spectacle for the guests to gossip about. You bastard! Turning his head to the persistent gaze that followed them for quite a long time, Bjorn saw Peter, who was animatedly mouthing out swear words directed at him. Hey, are you going to do it too? Seriously, Peter asked in surprise with his gaze. Without hesitation, Bjorn raised his chin and looked down at the fussy lady beside him. Erna was walking while only looking forward, completely ignoring his existence. Her cheeks, as well as his earlobes and the corner of her eyes, were dyed red, just like a freshly ripened apple that was ready to be eaten. Who the hell is that lady? Philip Dniester's face hardened with embarrassment as he asked his wife. In the end, he avoided the worst aftermath out of Bjorn and Gladys' relationship, but considering the rumors that were now spreading from the guest's mouth, it was hard to say that the current situation was very optimistic. It's Erna Hardy, father, Louise answered with a very angry face on behalf of the Queen. It's the young daughter of Viscount Hardy, who used older brother Bjorn to attract others' attention at the royal ball. The explanation that Louise added made the king's countenance even darker. The Queen, who had been quietly listening to the story between them, shifted her gaze towards the entrance of the hall where the two had disappeared. I thought that Bjorn would not be willing to accept Gladys' greeting, but I didn't expect it to end up this way. It is childish of him to just turn around and leave. Maybe he can be that shameless? It's just a handkerchief. Who else would fall for such an obvious, low-level trick other than older brother? Mind your words, Louise. There are many ears around us at the moment. Isabel Dniester reminded her agitated daughter with soft, powerful words. She wanted to say more, but Louise couldn't maintain her stubbornness and retreated in the end. I need to investigate more about that girl. After confirming that Louise had returned to her husband, Isabel Dniester lowered her voice and whispered, "That's obviously what we should do, right?" She looked at her husband with a polite, gentle smile. The king, as expected, did not disagree with his wife's decision. Please go back first, Your Highness. Erna barely opened her mouth after arriving at the last exhibition room. It was a pretty bold statement, as it was her first sentence that she willingly told him ever since they started walking together. In the end, she still uttered these words even when she found it difficult to talk to her current partner. Bjorn looked down at the petite lady who had been looking at the painting in front of him just a while ago. Erna, on the other hand, was now staring back at him with her neck upright. Unlike those times when she ran away in fear, her eyes were firm and full of determination. Now that you have seen all the paintings, you should go back inside first, Your Highness. I will stay here a little longer. As if concerned that he would not understand, she repeated her statement slowly once again. Why? The Grand Duke's gaze stopped at her blue eyes that strangely stimulated his nerves. His eyes traveled towards her chest, then to the nape of her neck, where blue blood vessels were reflected beneath her translucent pale skin. All this time, Erna did not avert her eyes and also maintained her gaze at him. Are there any paintings left for me to see alone?
No.
I don't mean that. Then? You asked to see the paintings together. Now that we have seen all the paintings on display, I think my role is over. Her tone was stiff as if trying to show her displeasure, but unfortunately, she didn't appear threatening to him at all. After taking a quick look at the onlookers who had been following them all the way here, Bjorn suddenly took a step closer toward his partner. Erna, who was startled by his sudden move, tried to back away quickly, but his arm was a little faster than her, and he managed to grab her before she could escape. Stay here. He shook his head and whispered to her. There are many eyes looking at us. He continued. Erna realized what he meant and followed his gaze, and soon became docile. From a distance, their interaction must have been quite affectionate and secretive, like a pair of lovebirds. Are you angry? He whispered softly. If not for his mischievous expression, she would have thought that he was concerned for her feelings. I'm not. Erna also lowered her voice and replied. She was obviously lying, and her cute frowning expression in an attempt to fool him made him laugh. Really? You look angry in my eyes, though. I am not angry, Your Highness. She denied once again with her eyes tightly closed. I also caused a lot of trouble to Your Highness at the royal ball, so I think today's incident has made up for that mistake. Mistake? Made up. With narrowed eyes, he looked at the lady who acted as if she took care of his problems. I admit that I'm angry because I have been troubled these days due to Miss Hardy's actions. So, you're telling me that you finally understand the consequences of your past actions? Since you felt that you have compensated me for what happened before, we are now even? What kind of calculation is that? You are truly a very scheming lady. Looking at Erna, who kept her mouth shut, Bjorn burst into laughter without realizing it. Even though this lady in front of him appeared timid, she had the guts to spit out what she wanted to say in the end. After all, this kind of person, they appeared docile but were actually beasts if you know them well enough. I accept. I guess it was a reasonable deal. He nodded and finally decided to let her go. He already got what he wanted, so at this point he wouldn't mind letting her get away for now. That was until he saw Erna's expression that blatantly showed her relief from finally escaping from his clutches. Bjorn, with irritation boiling inside his chest that came out of nowhere, suddenly snatched her little hand that was adorned with lace gloves. It was only after his lips had touched the back of her hand that Erna realized what had just happened. The silent exhibition room roared with exclamations from the guests, who pretended to appreciate the paintings while secretly watching them at the same time. The Grand Duke didn't pay attention to the commotion and politely bent down once again and kissed the back of Erna's hand as if she were a princess. Then I look forward to seeing you once again, Miss Hardy. He finally left after leaving a sweet goodbye as if she was his lover. Seeing Erna's bright red face while staring at him in shock, his chest finally felt a lot lighter. Bjorn left the exhibition room without any regrets, and as expected, Peter and his companions were waiting for him in the hallway. What did you say to her? Are you planning to meet again? I'm not interested, my ass. And yet here you are getting the upper hand, Peter said mockingly, while following behind Bjorn, who continued walking down the hallway slowly without saying a single word in reply. Are you really gonna join us? You have already stolen so much money from us. Is it too much of a loss for you to let us win? Do you think that any reward will be wasted if it didn't end up in your hands? Leonard decided to also join the Inquisition of the Grand Duke. Half of that stake should have been mine in the end, right? It's the prize I would have won if you hadn't started this asshole bet. Bjorn's reply surprised Leonard, because in the end, that would have been the likely scenario to happen if his stupid bet was not made. "Look at this bastard. Those who have more in life are the scariest one in the end. What a bastard with a pure lust for money." Peter exclaimed and stuck out his tongue in amazement. To seduce another woman in front of everyone because the stake is so precious. I guess if you want to be rich, you have to live such a life. By the way, what are you going to do now? Everyone must be cursing you to death, I assume. Leonard asked. Why does it matter? What about Ms. Hardy? Did you make such a bet because you were so worried about Erna Hardy? Bjorn cut off his peer's petty sympathy with a remark laced with ridicule. The crowd of noble men, who were at a loss for words, averted their gazes. In the end, the silence between them did not last very long, thanks to the director of the Royal Academy of Arts who arrived just in time. Having found the prince, the director hurriedly approached him and offered his greetings together with a young man on his side. "This is Pavel, my pupil who won the first prize in this art exhibition. He is the most promising talent in the Art Academy, so I wanted to introduce him to His Highness the Grand Duke." The head of the art center introduced his pupil with a smile full of pride. When the young man's eyes met the Grand Duke, he lowered his head once more, showing humility. The red-haired man had the impression that was closer to a soldier rather than an artist. Bjorn responded to their greetings with appropriate courtesy. After all, art is beyond his interest, but he still needs to show his respect. It was not his forte to recognize who could be a talented painter that could lead the kingdom's culture to the new era. However, if the price of their work soars, then that would be a different matter for him. He continued on his way, leaving the two people behind surrounded with brief silence. It was when he reached the end of the hallway that he finally remembered that it was not the first time he heard that young artist's name.
Pavel.
Bjorn, who stopped suddenly, called out the familiar name once again. It was the name that a certain familiar lady was calling out eagerly while wandering through the garden. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the path they had just walked through. The art director and Pavel had just entered the exhibition room at the end of the hallway, the same exhibition room where he left her behind.